Go time.
Good evening, everyone. After fighting with logins, lounge creation, other logins, we are finally available for our Mix and Mash Battle Lounge segment. 2NK team welcomes you to another Monday of Street Fighter V. As with recently, you won't get the full team, and we are spread out amongst various lounges. Some of us have lounges we are hosting, and some of us have lounges that we are just joining, and you'll have to join the stream sometimes to figure out which one that is, or at least poke in stream chat even if you're not actually watching. Today it looks like we're going to be having matches with Blanca and possibly Boxer. And we're at least starting out our day by watching the Wolf do the Nikali thing.
Round one.
Today's stream is mostly about wanting to do things, wanting things you can't necessarily have. Hence the odd title if you were wondering what that title was about. It was just the first thing that came to mind when I had that thought. So much of fighting games is based on what you think is a good idea, what you want to do in a given timing. And it's also partially why we continually talk in many games about being willing to play through lag. As we get higher level, this becomes less and less useful as a thing, but most of the time the thing that's affecting you about lag is not your defense. It's probably that you're, despite your wishes, you're probably doing just as well as the other person. Because in the early growth period of such games, you're more so working out how to do what you want to do, and this often leads to doing it too much. Too much to win, anyway. You shouldn't necessarily feel anywhere good or bad about doing too much of something and learning from it, but it isn't so helpful to do too much of something simply because you keep on failing at it. If you haven't learned why you're failing at it, it didn't do you any good. So, while there is definitely a couple of bits of damage here being taken by the Wolf, possibly, and I don't know if this is laggy or not being able to see Blanca do certain things, you can see from the Blanca's playstyle that mostly that can't possibly be the case. In some cases, it's lack of experience with Blanca bot. But, so far from their playstyle, I wouldn't say most of it is that either. It's, I want to do this, and the opponent being ready for this, whatever it is, either because of going for a really big punish or desperate move, but so far it doesn't look it, or, in the case of this player, just having a really solid game plan of their own. Blanca's game plan tends to be to minimize damage while annoying the enemy, and it can make him harder to play and, by many people's standards, lower tier than most of the cast. And to many extents this is true. If you're playing a game where your primary goal is to minimize taking damage, then you have to get really good at that compared to playing a game plan where you are just preventing your opponent from moving ever. But this sort of playstyle is enjoyable to people whether or not it's top tier. So if you are one of those people, today we're looking at it from the perspective of the Blanca player. Blanca stays in nearly constant motion, if he can afford it. And by getting out of the way of specific things the opponent wants to do, or being in a physical state where even if he gets hit, it's not much, he's hard to pin down to get all your good combos or whatever. That's one of the main things you're dealing with against this character. Yes, you're hitting Blanca, but you're hitting Blanca once, and then maybe getting a conversion. Or if you practice a lot on the punishes, and I mean a lot because it can change the way you have to punish certain things, even the same move. You have enough problem with the fact that his moves can't always be distinguished until you've become fairly experienced. Then, on top of that, even if you did, sometimes you can't punish it the same way twice. So with all this, you get to see mostly that style and flow. Blanca is moving constantly. You don't necessarily know if you have to block, how long you have to block, which way you can approach, or anything. So the occasional "I've overdone it and now I'm in trouble" happens to this type of character a lot more.
Blanca wins. Round 1.
But currently their game plan is quite solid. You could call it basic Blanca, but there's definitely some signs that this isn't very basic. Yes, they continually just seem to do moves, but these moves are often very calculated so far in terms of where they're trying to go. And you can see the relatively strong defense when they do things like get pushed out or block for long enough. If anything, I'd say this player's main problem is accuracy, and accuracy is something you have to work on a lot to play Blanca. Every time you miss an attack, sure, you're not necessarily going to take too much damage, but you weren't playing a character that got to avoid taking any damage easily anyway. So every little bit does matter, as shown.
Round 2. Fight.
What you definitely get is a lot more time spent doing motions and movements that don't actually have any intention of hitting the opponent, which is something that quite a lot of people could work on, as a team we generally don't have a lot of this yet. Most of the time people are spending time trying to make sure their attacks actually hit, that they slip through the opponent's defenses or something. But there's a lot to be said for just forcing the opponent to block at a spacing that suits you. Blanca also has a lot of good ways to cover lots of space for punishes that other characters just don't. And I feel as if that was supposed to be EX something.
Macaulay wins.
I think someone else joined?
It's go time.
Yeah, we're gonna roll to back here and see if that works out. But it's unclear because this connection could be good, it could be terrible. They probably weren't ready for their match either. No, they're there. Let's hope this connection is better than it looks like it will be from this side. This is generally content based on the Atlantic Rim, but because of that, not everyone is actually particularly geographically close. You can just know that they're somewhere on that circle, and you might be very far from them, or quite good and close in terms of your connection. I'd say let's see what adaptations DeWolf could make, but there's not a lot of adapting to do here, given the amount of experience he has with this character. But maybe they changed character and you'll find out now. Yep, here we go. So we see the Rashid instead.
Round 1. Fight.
Either or I zoned out because I don't think there were Rashid on this character stat screen or on the down screen. Either way, you're seeing a lot of the same here. It's not clear whether or not they're just learning stuff, but we'll know in a minute, I guess. The thing that most people need to understand about Rashid is when Rashid's pressure ends, what should you do? This is the primary thing you hear about. Rashid is a character who is super good at pinning you down, but not terribly good at targeting really specific spaces on screen quickly. This comes up in other games. It's kind of hard to explain it fully, but there are definitely characters who have trouble targeting specific spots on screen, and this means when you don't know what else to do and need to defend, you should head for that spot. Even if the chances are that they know this and they're gonna go for something to hit that spot, there's still good reasons to do this. It comes up a lot because players tend to do specific things subconsciously, and if you realize, well, my subconscious decision, the thing I will do if I don't think about it, beats this specific option, your opponent will stop using that option. If they realize, well, every time I go for this, you go for backdash and then punish me, then I'm going to stop doing that and focus on punishing backdashes instead, which will get you because you are used to backdashing. The important point, therefore, is to switch the thing your opponent considers important to deal with. In Rashid's case, backdash can be chased, and that's why I used it as an example. Rashid has a lot of ways to beat up someone who is attempting to backdash after Rashid pressure. They're not super safe all the time. They're not great ideas, but he also can block you from punishing him from a lot of things if you backdash. So, if backdash was your default, what you would want is to do something that makes this character not focus on your own default. Which is interesting to think about because the thing you normally should do when you're facing Rashid and being pressured, let's assume that the Rashid player knows which strings to hit so that you have to block basically forever. The thing you actually want to do is jump straight up. Rashid doesn't have a lot of moves that target the space just neutral in front of him, in the air, despite having good anti-airs for the purpose and everything. And because of the style of movement that the character normally employs, it's not super likely that even if he does do this sort of thing, that he'll be ready to do it. In other words, his pressure has to be given up in order to be punishing this constant neutral jump at the end of his pressure you do. But obviously your goal is not to do it every single time. Your goal is to do it when you can think about doing it. And the rest of the time, it isn't even a matter of choosing to backdash. The rest of the time, if that was your default, you're going to backdash. The result is that your opponent doesn't spend as much time thinking about how to punish the backdash. They spend their time thinking about how to punish the hardest thing to punish. And you get away with the backdash more often. A lot of the time, the thing that you do the neutral jump in this case, causes them to take an action that makes the whole backdash stronger. It's really important to think about this not just on pressure of your own, but heavily skew it on defense if you can. If you know what you tend to do, force your opponent to do something to beat something else you can do.
It's go time.
But let's get our semi-usual team killer match, as they call it in tournaments. Since having this on screen gives us a much more familiar place to explain the concept I'm talking about from. It doesn't always have to be a subconscious thing either. If your character has a really good bit of damage off thing A, you often want to do it. In Kareen's case, she has a lot of good conversions, and especially when she has meter, she has probably the third best "I've just hit you once and therefore I'm doing things" in the game. She doesn't necessarily have a ton of damage from them, definitely not super high on that list, but she gets a lot of control out of landing the correct type of hit. Her light kick on counter hit combos into stuff. She has a lot of moves with a lot of different reach in all sorts of directions.
Round one.
And her crouch medium kick reaches quite far, particularly if the crouch medium punch landed anything. Stand medium punch is also good. Overall, generally this character, once you have decided to pressure her, if she finds the right moment to strike back, you're probably going to suffer reasonably high damage. But that of course leads to Kansuki Dynasty obviously doing this as often as possible. And the result of doing this as often as possible is that when you get it wrong, you can end up quite heavily damaged yourself. Most importantly, this comes up and came up recently in tournament against those characters that really can just keep hitting buttons and not have a hole to strike back through. They don't care how many times you try. Their basic strings will almost always lead to you not being able to hit anything. Guile is a good example of this if played correctly. Bison is a good example of this if played in nearly any level. Whereas on the opposite end, you have characters like Urien and Ken who have lots of little holes in their movement and constantly have to vary their offense and then whiff punish whatever it is you've decided to throw out. Necalli is close on that scale to Bison and Guile. Necalli does more or less just get to keep hitting buttons and keep the opponent at the range he prefers until something really heavy changes. So Kareen does well in footsies, but as soon as she has to deal with, okay, I have hit you, now you are blocking, there isn't necessarily a really great way through this. Necalli could counter most of them, many on reaction. And, depending on how much meter is available, even the things that Kareen normally treats as, well, this at least must be safe, right? Necalli has ways to quickly punish them. Not to mention, being able to just dash up command throw if necessary. You can avoid this, but if your mindset is not in that space, not happening. It's partially one of the reasons why both this character and Sakura manage to throw people so much. They have so many ways for you to keep on getting pressured, and then a safe, slightly or semi-safe advancing move that you can't backdash out of. Or you can't decide, well, I'll just walk back instead and hope for the best now that I seem to be out of your low range or your sweep range or whatever. Overall, it doesn't work out well. Compounded by the fact that Necalli's sweep is one of the best in the game in terms of recovery. Kareen can absolutely punish it, but she doesn't get a whole lot of damage off doing it at max range. Unlike Rashid, Nikali really can just punish you if you neutral jump in front. What he doesn't do well is punish you if you jump over his head. And that is where we often have that advice. Take a step back or two, and then if you think Nikali is going to come after you, jump forward. Neutral jump also is good because, again, it does cause the Nikali player to have to think about a very difficult thing. How to time the crouch heavy punch, how to step forward, how to jump forward medium punch, how to uppercut in some fairly tight spaces. But a lot of what you want to do here is making it so that they don't just keep hitting buttons. So if you've ever watched one of our streams and not understood the purpose of that, this is where it mostly comes in. And it's really consistent. Like, games are just like this in general. Characters have emergent weaknesses or designed weaknesses that come from trying to use their strength. You can minimize, therefore, how much of an opponent's strength they can use by countering the idea of using it. If you make it unsafe to use their strength, then so be it. That's it. They will either continue to use it and hope that you get overwhelmed, or they'll use it less and the fight will be easier for you.
You win.
A lot of the time, this is considered fair or normal because the player isn't losing their ability to defend themselves. They're not losing the match because you've discouraged them from doing this thing. They're losing their own offense, their own hurting you ability. It just makes matches more complex or longer or more involved in terms of thought. If you're stubborn and refuse to give it up and your opponent beats you up because of it, it's not as if the game ruined you. You sort of ruined yourself. This does, of course, like everything else, come in degrees. There is a point where someone can legitimately argue, well, if all you have to do is jump over my main strategy, then I just don't get to use it, so I might as well not have it, so my character is actually kind of weak.
Round two. Fight.
But that's up to game designers to figure out the specifics and the little bits that all decide, is this fair or not. At the moment, I'm just explaining why it is that you see it happen so often. Because it's not a great idea to just sit there and let Nikali do this. You're eventually going to end up in some sort of trouble. It is a generally better idea to jump over Nikali's head when you can, and even if you get hit with the cross-cut DP, as it is known, this is not a lot of damage from Nikali. I'm not even sure it's particularly good Oki for Nikali. It's just a defense he has available, and that one was probably better. The back throw when you land and don't actually do things is probably best. So you get to see a lot of flows of this type, and if you've watched high-level matches with this in mind, you'll learn to recognize at least some of them. The reason the person is not using this move is because it will lead to a situation that they won't be able to do what they wanted for. It's also quite heavily a matter of straining the person enough to make them incapable of doing something. I very recently saw on Reddit's Twitter someone responding to the fact that dashes in this game are too fast, because if you're focused on not getting jumped on, you can't necessarily react to dashes. But this is intentional. You get to pick one, and the rest has to be muscle memory. You're responding to dashes, or you're anti-airing. Because if you could easily do both of those things all of the time, then you would never have to do anything but stand there. Your opponent would not be able to take any actions at all, except by playing specific characters that functionally teleport or something. A character who is forced to walk as their main strategy, if they can't dash, they don't have any defensive trick that will get them through, or armor, and you can anti-air every jump, then they don't get to do anything. And games used to be a lot more like this back in the day, because there simply weren't enough options for other things. It does, however, mean that you have to spend a lot of time in this game learning these things and remembering them. Or recreating the scenario for yourself on the fly, which can be easy for some and relatively hard for others. If you find it hard, please write notes for yourself. It's much easier. Because even if you do have to do more adaptation and you feel as if your notes aren't sufficient, it still helps. Another thing we've often seen is the tendency for players to play two different characters in much the same ways, and we're seeing that sort of thing here now. This Abigail style was not necessarily completely obvious from the Blanca style, but it doesn't take too much thought to understand that this is how a potential Blanca main or Blanca enthusiast chooses to play Abigail. They are minimizing damage, looking for ways through positions, and moving a lot more than certain Abigail players naturally do. Our Karina is quite used to Abigail, in general, but this style of Abigail isn't the exact thing you'd think of. Like, the counter strategies for basic Abigail aren't the same as the counter strategies for this type.
You win.
This isn't a fully developed style, though. And you can see little chinks in it.
Round one.
Probably just that they haven't had time to develop yet. Abigail has quite a lot of reach, and can therefore do many things from quite far away. But, unlike Blanca, who has a lot of, let's call it, defense on his movement, Abigail has very little. Abigail is vulnerable while moving to a much greater extent than Blanca is. So, continuing to move is more likely to get you not necessarily even punished, but just randomly stray hit. Facing someone who actually knows Abigail's moves properties makes it even worse. Because they'll get less freaked out by certain things you manage to do, and just continue to play the match and respond. So, oh, you've jumped from there, I know how to counter that. You've attempted to reach me from this space, I know how to get around or over that, and so on down the line. You can, of course, develop a special or specific style for any character to complement the way that you just think about it, the way that you normally play. But do remember that it does take quite a lot of work. Someone who understands your main, or understands at least what your main is and the way you play them, may be able to figure out how you're going to play nearly any other character you pick up with a little bit of thought.
It's go time.
And even if they don't figure it out directly, it's more likely that they are going to see you do something, make the mental connections about why you do it, and work out the rest from there.
Let's do this.
While we now functionally consider DeWolf's main to be Necalli, and technically, I guess we always did, you can think of that related to DeWolf's previous playing of Alex. Necalli and Alex can be played very similarly. In fact, if you're one of those people who are like, but tier lists though, but you like Alex, then you should probably at least pick up Necalli as a character you play when you think you need to win and that the job won't be done on the other side. Here we see another relatively obvious shift. Honda has basically the same game plan as Blanca. In fact, this is for a long time why I thought that neither of them would get into the game at all. They certainly wouldn't have been in the early setup because they play too similarly, and they play similarly in their playstyle to a character we already had at the time. Specifically, it's sort of how Rashid moves. The idea of, okay, I'm coming at you from relatively far away, I'm mashing some buttons to get, well, in Rashid's case, worse frame data, but in this case, just moves. But there is a reason why a player could go, well, I feel like playing Honda today, I feel like playing Blanca today, and that not be terribly different for the player. There's a lot of mastery you could put into when you've gotten good enough to recognize, oh, I like this little thing. The other character can't do this, so I'll play this one as my main. But the game is fairly open most of the time when it comes to these things. When people tell you pick the character that you like, they're trying to tell you to pick the archetype that you like. Or at least the character you think looks cool, because you can probably count on it being similar. If you want to throw your weight around quite literally, Blanca might not be the first thing you think of. You're thinking of Wild Man, it doesn't necessarily sound like me. But Honda does the job. So, now we can start thinking about how the wolf should be handling this. And it's pretty simple. We've been through it before, but it doesn't come up as often, so you sometimes have to remind. Most of the time, Necalli's jump normals are enough to deal with Sumo Splash. The main problem is the Sumo Splash, because the Sumo Splash is the thing that allows Honda to get close enough from very far away without any risk. When Honda is far away, Necalli doesn't have to do a whole lot. In fact, the wolf keeps on getting hit by trying to do something in that moment. But yeah, you can basically just always block, sometimes jump and block, and the headbutt will put Honda at a position that is not so great. Also, because it does reach that far, players are relatively tempted to use it fairly soon after getting into that position. But you can see the Sumo Splash here is being used to get closer. You You can use relative rapid advanced techniques where you walk forward a little bit and then block, walk forward a little bit and then block. This disables some of Nikali's moves, but it's still pretty good.
Round 2.
And this is one of the places, possibly one of the matchups, where it really might be better to play Alex. Alex has more ways of crossing the screen than Nikali does, that are slightly harder to counter from Honda's side, and could just use armored moves to charge through Honda's headbutt. There's a dash up after the back again. And unfortunately flattened. So, I don't know if they're going to pick Honda again, but let's see if they'll play at all if we rotate back.
It's go time.
Sometimes you have to change your character to your secondary based on the intention of your opponent. Not necessarily what character they're playing, but simply the type of person they are, forcing you to do specific things. It's come up more than once on these streams that if Kansuki Dynasty is facing a player who absolutely refuses to play footsie, she should probably be playing Cammy. Now, whether or not she can adjust quickly enough to actually do so isn't so important, but still. Gil is going to be much harder to do this sort of thing with, even though he does have many of the same abilities. He can charge across the screen, he can be fairly safe when doing so, and he gets to add fireballs to the game plan, but fireballs don't help a lot against Nikali in the first place, so we'll see what happens on that front.
Harmony. That is the truth of what you
His aerial moonsault style flip kick knee isn't super great for the same sorts of things either, as it's easier to anti-air and easier to react to. Plus you can like dash out of it without gaining anything. But we don't know exactly why this player has chosen to play Gil. It could be because they like this character, or they're just trying to figure out which characters they really like. And whether or not they manage to beat the Wolf in the match is not telling them whether or not they like the character. It's just, my opponent isn't countering this character, so let me see. But that goes fairly well into the exact theme of this particular stream. The player wants to, let's assume, learn something about which character they like to play. That could be the furthest possible thing from their goal here, but let's go with it because it suits my narrative at the moment. If that was what they wanted, they're not going to gain much out of just, I chose a character that you haven't beaten. This character wins, therefore. It doesn't tell them that they like the character. In fact, most of the time you should seek the character where you don't hate losing as much. If you're really, let's say, mature, advanced, you might be able to just not hate losing at all. This is also particularly dependent on your enemy though. So, this player might be really enjoying playing Gil, even if they have to worry about people armoring through fireballs or jumping over them or having to get the right spacing for their little flip kick.
Round one. Fight. Useless.
So, it might be harder, but bear it in mind when you're trying to pick a character. If you like the thing they do and needing to get it right in some way, even losing shouldn't necessarily be a huge deterrent. When people tell you the tier list says that this character will lose more often, well, if there's no really great equivalent for the game plan you want, you are probably going to lose anyway. You aren't the sort of person that has the, let's call it fortune, of picking the top tier and it working because you play them wrong. Just subconsciously, or you'll learn to play them correctly and be miserable the entire time. Which is terrible.
It is time to proceed. Round two. Fight.
They've said that they wanted the V skills to be a strong indication of something relative to the character, something you like to do. They didn't always succeed, but quite a lot of the time it's pretty good. If you don't like using the character's V skill, and in this case now you've got a second one to choose from, if you don't like using either of them, that was the way that the designers intended to telegraph the character's game plan. You can choose to play them differently, but understand that it's probably going to be an advanced action. So if you want to play Gil, but have no interest in parrying anything, maybe you should play Urian. One could argue, well, maybe you should play Urian either way because Urian is better. Maybe. But you might suck at playing Urian if you wanted to parry. In which case, if you were good at parrying and wanted to parry, you'd be better at playing Gil. But if you don't want to parry, what are you doing? At least consider that you could play a character that is very similar but gets armor instead of a parry. Or zones even better with V-Skill 2. Other than that, they're very similar characters in their motions, their normals, their game plans. Even their capacity to convert into big damage, while different, is the outcome of the amount of damage you do is often very similar. But maybe they will play Urian. Maybe we'll get to see that in a bit.
Round two. Fight.
But as they don't seem to intend to replay Honda, I guess there's no specific reason for DeWolf to bring out Alex other than the fact that this person's general style of play is the one that Alex is better against. They're not terribly hard to get close to. They're not terribly hard to open up either. But they have ways of moving and ways of attacking where armor would absolutely be more effective, and ways of crossing the screen quickly would definitely help.
It's go time.
Let's go look for something different. Specifically, Kansuke Dynasty also needs to get very specific types of experience on her own. And we're looking around for someone that suits that. Oh, this lounge already has just fine in it.
Round one. Fight.
Solid bear, huh? Some people are kind enough to telegraph their probably intended playstyle in their names. Not everyone, but you know.
Perfect KO. Round two. Fight. Round one. Fight.
One interesting thing you can think of that I would tell you, as I often do on these streams, is that watching this Zangief makes me believe they're an Abigail. Because Zangief moves forward in almost all of the situations where they move backward. Abigail has enough range to attack from those positions, and therefore be fine. Zangief generally doesn't. You can do more tricks to get the job done, but there's a lot of spaces where you see this person back off, where I would expect a Zangief player to hit some buttons. Specifically like stand, medium kick, and definitely the nearly all-powerful since last buff, Zangief stand medium punch.
Round two.
Not seeing that move at all would make me strongly suspect, oh, you're not a Zangief player. You play characters like this but you want to do Zangief things without necessarily having most of the Zangief experience required to know how to do them. And that can of course be fun. Especially if you for some reason just don't feel like playing your Abigail or are trying to give someone a bit of handicap. But regardless of the outcome of any given match you're seeing here, my thought is definitely, oh, you're much more so an Abigail player. Because almost every situation you see them do things that look beneficial, Abigail would benefit more from doing the same things. They're probably doing the things that they're used to doing or think of doing. And those things just aren't as rewarding when playing Zangief.
Let's do this.
Well, this nightmare of a Ryu player appears to continue to be. And in this case, we therefore end up watching Just Fine play a little earlier since someone shifted around.
Round 1. Fight!
Looks like someone who is a strong fan of the Ryu fundamentals game. Which is not something Bison deals with terribly well, actually. It's easier for Bison to avoid having to play the Ryu fundamentals game altogether, but once forced into it, it's rough to completely do correctly. Fortunately, the main thing limiting Bison players in this is just walk speed. Because otherwise they have a lot of mobility they can use for these situations. And a lot of good defenses against Ryu ever getting to that space on screen. Ryu players in turn should generally just use their parry, even if it seems like it might be risky, mainly because Bison's good crush counters, one of them is super slow, as in down forward heavy punch. Yeah, it might make it, and you will end up disadvantaged if they do it on reaction to your parry and you block, they're still at advantage. But otherwise, you don't have that much to worry about. Bison's stand heavy kick is long in terms of full animation, but doesn't go very far, which means if you were parrying because you expected something crazy to happen, you're not usually going to be in range to get kicked. And while it is bad to get crush countered on slide, not to mention this move also takes long to start up. So it is our general suggestion, particularly if you're using Ryu's V skill 2 as this player is doing, try parrying through more stuff. Because otherwise, Bison's not going to let you play the fundamentals game in the first place. He doesn't care about your jumps, anti-airs, and it ignores your long-range fireballs and won't let you get to the crouch medium kick position without a fight. So, it's really hard to do this without finding the watt down, finding the forward heavy punch timing, or parrying correctly. Even that's just a pain. Which is odd because this isn't actually a terribly bad matchup for Ryu in any way, it's just that you don't get to play standard Ryu for very long at a time. You either have to jump more, parry more, or use more EX meter to lock Bison down so you can move. You can also try just dashing up to people, but most of the time, you'll eventually get punished a lot for doing this. It looks like Nightmare's choice has so far been jump more. This is a problem because if you spend too much time looking for your own jump timing, you also have to switch to airs because you're not likely to uppercut. At least not at this level, but it's in there somewhere. Still have options. Taking the time to recover from the stun, but there's another EX Fireball. But still trying to play the fundamentals game, and again, Bison's not going to stand there. Doesn't have to. Probably will just ignore. And Jasmine is particularly confident in just ignoring people's crouch medium kicks because she trains against a lot of people who do the crouch medium kick thing, making it a little bit easier to just not. I don't know if that one was laggy. It didn't terribly look it, but even then, there wasn't that much going on where lag was the thing you could say caused the loss. I guess it must be that if it was really laggy, it would be impossible for Ryu to anti-air. But other than that, well, this at least is 5 bars, so maybe better? Often we have issues here because the connection just, for some reason, is unstable between these two regardless of the bars, or rapidly becomes so for some unknown reason. Looking at you, Comcast. But now you get another of our quote-unquote team killer matches, and possibly the explanation for why Jasmine has learned to sometimes just ignore people who are not at the right range. Just that consistent feeling of, have you tried not hitting buttons though? Fortunately for Kareen, Bison doesn't benefit much from being at that range. It's not actually a lockout, as it is with Ryu, because Kareen has the ability to hit stand medium kick much more effectively than Ryu does, and stand heavy kick will often reach just enough to cause trouble. But as you can see, it's already sort of demonstrated. Kazuki Dynasty has learned to just hit sweep there, because she sort of knows that there's no position Bison wants to stay in where the crouch medium kick is going to hit, so just hit longer buttons. Or do that. One of the benefits of having a strong Bison to train against is that you learn a lot of weird things you get to do against Scissor Kick. But despite that being one of Kareen's standard game plans, you see that it doesn't come up here much at all. She just doesn't spend a lot of time trying to hit that button, except as more so a check. And Ryu doesn't benefit a lot from trying to hit crouch medium kick as a check. Can't use it to get any closer, and generally has extremely unsafe moves to go into, whereas Kareen has one safe move and Resenha, which, while obviously quite unsafe, against Bison has at least a chance of hitting or causing problems to the opponent there.
Final round. Fight.
Bison can counter this usually quite heavily by using more Psycho Burst. It pushes Kareen out of both her optimal ranges, but has enough of a wind down for Kareen to sort of bait it and then do various things. So it's a big trade-off here. Do you really want to stop her from hitting crouch medium kick and sweep when they're not really damaging you anyway? How important is this to you? Sometimes it's really important. Here's one of those positions. When you're in the corner, you absolutely want to use the Psycho Burst just to push her far enough that you won't get corner guarded. Specifically, you can use Head Stomp or Devil Reverse to get away from Kareen in the corner, when she's further away from you. When she's quite close, she'll either react really quickly with the ES Rasenha, or as soon as you cross the other side of her, do like back jump, or sometimes it turns into a forward jump with a medium punch and then air combos and stuff. You don't want to get corner guarded at close range with Bison. But Karine doesn't have a lot of good ways to hit Bison after having to block Psycho Burst in the corner. So if you get the opportunity, go for it. The corner might not be the best place to convert into damage for Bison, but you still get something. And you'd want to end this sort of situation as soon as possible to prevent all the little Karine things she does.
Round 2. Fight.
That's another good example. The only thing that stops that situation is Psycho Burst, really.
You win.
You can hope that she'll Rasenha and hope that your Head Stomp or ES Head Stomp resolves the situation, but as far as I know, they've changed that move, making it no longer an option either, so you have to Psycho Burst. The good part is, Karine doesn't really have a way through Psycho Burst. She risks jumping or she waits. So, at least that way, you have a chance of just doing things. This doesn't apply for characters like Chun-Li who slide under it, or characters who have some form of neutral jump attack or high flip of some type to keep the lockdown going while still countering, or at least partially countering, the Devil Reverse escape. But Karine has none of these things, so you just Psycho Burst her and push her out.
Karine Kanzuki. Abigail. Abigail!
So if we start from the principle, this player is an Abigail player,
Round 1.
then different things happen. Yet you can already see it. They're definitely moving to the space where Abigail can do things that Zangief definitely couldn't. Which means they're probably going to be fairly standard. And we should get a good match because, as noted before, Hanzaki Dynasty knows this matchup pretty well. It's just a matter of, as with all of us, needing to practice how exactly long to block that. And you can actually even see it in there. The last Abigail player she fought, she actually blocked both hits of it because the timing was different. If you roll from closer, it's easier to block both hits because of the timing than if you get the spacing for the rolling kick correct. So it's good to see Solid Bear back to being a Solid Bear. And that is, as you've seen before, or heard before maybe, our general suggestion. If you don't know what to do against Abigail on wake up, jump forward, because the worst that's going to happen is that Abigail will spend a lot of meter to hurt you. Everything else is just a reset into a slightly less dangerous situation. It's still dangerous, you still have to think of the correct thing to do, but it's less dangerous for sure. but yet backing off to the space where Abigail can react to things with those long buttons while still catching you on the advance. Skills, capacities that Zangief just does not have in any form. Whether this is because they learned to play Abigail and then try to apply the same principles to Zangief, or because they specifically like playing like this, who knows? But for now, we can definitely see this. And this tends to annoy Kansuki Density because she doesn't have enough faith in the walk forward most of the time. You can absolutely just walk Abigail all the way to the other side of the screen when this is happening. It's just very slow. But as the character has basically no way of quickly getting to the other side again, unlike characters like Claw who can do this all day, you have to learn to, at some point, relax enough to walk them down.
Round 1.
Your own explosive actions can work out well, but yeah, that's not going to work because the player is not in the situation where this is the thing that matters in the first place. Eventually, they'll probably do something that brings them close enough to you that you get to fight, but at that point, they're still going to just back off again. And this is correct. There's no good reason to do it any other way from their side, especially against Kareen, so just leave it. Depending on their spacing, you might consider jumping, but they're not Nikali, so it's not necessarily the best option there either. Still needs to practice the throw on that. The jump back will nearly never work, and the throw is among your best options, but of course it is the throw. And she does it again! So this is going to be another one of those matches where she probably laments later how much she pushes on or chases an opponent who is definitely setting that up. Kareen's high mobility, using Seppo and similar, is a good way to deal with at least some of this, but as it doesn't necessarily lead to anything directly other than better chase, I believe she finds herself often stressed out by this as well. The opponent can reach, but every time they do it too well, they must move backward in order to set back up the same situation. But immediately into Rasenha kind of worked. Yeah. This is one of those things where you absolutely have to look back at this video and say, well, I need to work on this like mentally because I'm defeating myself outright. The opponent is not doing a lot of work here. They're just staying calm enough to make this work for them. Does this work? It does work. But the result is needing to spend a ton of meter to not even actually finish the thing, because now you still, having used the super, have to go through the same thing again.
Final round. Fight.
But now we've gotten to something slightly more useful. A more familiar game plan position. Unfortunately, the amount of stress of the rest of the match and recognizing the problem has caused her to drop the main button required for this matchup. And even if one goes, oh yeah, I should use that button, what's probably going to happen is exactly what just happened. There's only a very specific timing to use it, and it's more of a whiff punish timing. So, knowing all of the little pieces of it gets rough quite fast. Again? No. Stress is a serious thing, kids. As demonstrated there, the real problem here is that the opponent is able to stay calm, completely calm for almost all of that, because they don't have a reason to be stressed out by pretty much anything. They have enough health to get through it, they have enough control to get through it, and they haven't really taken a lot of damage that has been, oh, I made a mistake. So when someone has become a solid bear and just isn't afraid of things because they're not making the mistakes, it's a lot easier for them to look at even tough situations and just not do it.
Let's do this. Round one. Fight!
So let's see if Nightmare can get to the point of getting to play any Ryu stuff, or if they're going to pick one of the main methods of dealing with the problem. Like, more seriously choose one. Jumping seems to have done pretty well. Their spacing is the one where jumping works best. They're not trying to get through by dashing and take Bison off guard, but Just Fine doesn't necessarily move a lot to get out of positions where it would be a thing, and doesn't use the skill 2 to counter the jump super easily with little effort, so we're getting to see some of it. But you're still looking at more or less the same concept. Ryu doesn't get to play a specific part of the game plan very easily.
Round two. Fight!
So, what happens here? The jump does seem to be working out today. Again, their spacing, as a result of everything else that's going on, makes the jump harder to counter. Regardless of anything Just Fine does, she has to both be super on guard for the jump itself, not to get baited out by the neutral jump, and still manage to figure out the correct anti-air. In her situation, the best thing to do is one of our Larabot style trainings. Just constantly play in your head what the correct anti-air for the precise spacing you're at is, and let yourself do the rest of the defense automatically. Her defense is good enough that she should probably be able to just defend automatically, for the most part. That would only deactivate, for example, if someone started dashing. But as dashing is actually the easiest to counter of these, it probably isn't going to be the first thing one should go to.
Round one. Fight!
Yeah, see? Because if you dash, you're relying on your opponent not having the delayed throw attack thing, which, again, she does, and I think might happen even if... You'd have to mix up the two so much that it's a strain on yourself, much more than on her. Not sure it would work out in the long term. At both players being at gold level, probably legitimately so. Not likely. That was a good bait. That particular little crazy Miki doesn't actually work in the expected way, I think, so... But the neutral jump does a job. Very close.
Round two. Fight!
You can definitely see Nightmare's overall adaptation plan here working out. You're not going to let me play fundamental neutral, so I'm going to do some other more creative things and see what happens. What they can't do is stay at this space though. They needed to stay closer than this. They needed to make her not able to dash. And I'm not sure that that's going to work out if they keep on moving slightly out, because the dash for Bison changes the game again. I think they've got enough meter to sort of make this work. Because Ryu doesn't care as much about Bison dashing if meter is available to deal with it. But hard to say here. It's gotten interesting in terms of adaptation concept, but she does have a how, or at least has just enough of a life lead. No, there it goes. Insufficient timing. But the jump works. And I think that was a matter of the range working out on that side, so again, super close. But at this point, both players are still more so fighting themselves very slightly than fighting the opponent. And when I say very slightly, I mean they're not fighting a lot as is. This is a lot of stray hits and not being sure whether or not you should block something or try to attack. You could say the main enemy here is experience level on both ends. But this is good because it means they both have time to pick some up. Just fine with what we are still considering to be the EX backdash. If anything, I'd suggest throwing out light punches between those kick buttons in neutral. More so to prevent the dash than anything else. It also stops a lot of weird little Bison things, because again, scissor kick is more vulnerable than you'd think. Dash is jabbable. There's a bunch of stuff Bison does where you would not think you can jab him out of it, but you just can, and this has always been true. Literally almost as a joke. So you could jab him out of Psycho Crusher before. I'm not sure you can do that now. I've never seen anyone try it. But knowing them, they probably kept it, and it's just harder. But auto defense skill pays off, and once again, Ryu can play this matchup, but it's so counterintuitive to what Ryu normally does until you get much higher level, and I'm not even sure then. You'd have to like go watch MDZ Jimmy or something to figure out what exactly it is that's supposed to happen here, because you are not going to easily get to hit that crouch medium kick, regardless of how buffed it's been.
Let's do this. Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight.
Here we go. We're still seeing more or less the same thing while Nightmare works out when exactly to do this parrying business. It's definitely not been working poorly so far. Fine's just a little too familiar with certain things.
And Bison wins.
I'm not sure if this comes from playing against Ryubot though, because if you put our Ryubot on the skill 2, I think it does most of the required things automatically because that's just how bots generally work. But this seems more of a game plan thing, and I don't remember ever considering putting that there. It might happen to be in the right place. If you have any understanding of bot theory, you'll understand there are only 3 places for any given thing to be given what it is, and therefore it's entirely possible that it's like a 33% chance that it's randomly in the right place and it will just do what it's supposed to do with no modification. But we definitely haven't planned it or thought about it. I should probably look into that and see if we can get it to work. Recently we've been having pretty good luck with, hey, this character has been changed in some way, the bot's working fine because the thing happens to be in the slot it should be in for that to work too, so yeah. So I'll probably have the team look into doing some testing on it. If you happen to use our Ryubot and have any information, let us know. You can as always contact us either through our website 2-mk.org. The contact page will give you various ways to do that. Or you can shortcut to the place most people contact each other these days, fighting games apparently. At least outside of Discord. Hit us up on Twitter at 2_mk_FGC. I think jumping worked better. I think they might not want to jump, but the thing about Bison is that this character, while he has decently good anti-airs, he has a sort of blind spot that you can get to. And quite a few characters can get there, where if Bison wants to actually do anything other than anti-air you, then jumping becomes quite strong. I think they were really hoping for that one, but it just didn't work out in the end.
And Bison wins.
So in this case, it's mostly been that Nightmare hasn't got enough under their belt to force Justine to use all of her focus up. Because that's mainly the way you do this sort of thing once you've gotten this far. That is probably not going to work. And most likely Justine just isn't even going to take this. Why are you here? Well, it looks like Nightmare's gonna give it a try? Maybe? Okay, I guess we're closing out on what might be the laggiest match in the history of Street Fighter V. See, there's a difference between this is actually unplayable and it just cuts out. We don't count those. We count the game is trying, but it's too laggy to function. That said, we have learned recently that 2 bars doesn't necessarily mean it will be terrible. Maybe this will be the first instance of 1 bar not actually being terrible. And it is true that they are 1 bar to this side, not necessarily 1 bar to Nightmare, so we'll see. Either way, we are coming to the end of our stream. This is probably the last on-stream match of the night, assuming that the match even happens. But we're likely to end either way. And we get the Ryu mirror out of it. Well, we know that given Nightmare's general playstyle so far displayed, this is going to come down to 2 things. Willingness to jump on both sides, and which of them is better in the footsie range. But even if it isn't laggy, we're immediately starting with the strategy of retreat until my opponent messes something up and hit buttons. Or maybe they're having trouble executing Tatsus, but it definitely wouldn't help if they were succeeding at these Tatsus, so. This isn't actually all that bad as a strategy though. It is functionally true that Axe Kick is a reasonably good counter to other Ryu trying to get into that range. Specifically, if you aren't the type that likes playing the standard hit with tip of crouch medium kick into fireball game, and you're not a super large fan of the fireball game yourself, it's a pretty good strategy to hit your Axe Kick because Ryu doesn't have a lot of really good counters to your Axe Kick as an opposing Ryu. He can get messed up getting into position. Sure, he can throw fireballs, but he could have done that anyway. So, if you think they're going to want to do it, Axe Kick isn't a bad option. I still can't tell whether or not this is laggy because it doesn't come through on this sort of thing. Another really good option is that even with it changed, given the amount of plus frames that Ryu gets on things, if you think a Ryu player is going to go for the crouch medium kick as part of their pushback string, as another Ryu, just parry after whatever is first. Because Ryu's parry does not care about high and low, and you do get to just hit things. They're going at it again. Maybe this was not in that case all that laggy, or maybe Nightmare just doesn't care. But that moment there, even if you've been sorta hit by it, just the recovery time of both moves mean you probably can't be crush countered. What I'm saying is if you get hit by stand medium punch and you think your opponent's going for a crouch medium kick, just parry anyway. Either you'll be out of range, and if they did hit the crouch medium kick, they're not going to be able to crush counter you as far as I know. Or you will parry it, and if you parry it, there's just enough time to just confirm into uppercut, or pretty much anything you like. Heavy uppercut is preferred. Yeah, you can definitely see it, which is a good way to end off this stream. One player who, regardless of anything else, definitely isn't thinking, yeah, I'm gonna walk around and hit some crouch medium kicks and get this new buffered fireball. They don't seem to have any interest in that front, which means Axe Kick is a good plan. But it was still relatively short. Hopefully this is repeatable for them, but this stream is ending. This lounge, obviously, we might remain in it for a little bit, but this has been really in 142MK. You can find all our bots at 2-mk.org. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.